Welcome, everyone. I'm Mary Minetti with the Institute for Patient and Family-Centered Care. And we are here to have a nice conversation with you about re-energizing partnerships amid COVID's resurgence. I'm joined by my colleagues Marie Abraham, who will be our chat moderator, and Natasha Reed, who is the technological queen and who can assist you if you're having any technological difficulties. You'll notice that there's a poll up about your role in your organization or in your community. And if you want to take just a minute to fill that out, I'll let Natasha decide when she's had enough responses, and then we can see who's in the room, in the virtual room. So it's almost divided in thirds, with a smattering of administrative and clinical leaders and diversity and equity staff and risk and safety personnel, which is really, those are very important voices to have at the table. Primarily, most of you are either coordinators responsible for implementing patient and family-centered care, or patient experience and or advisors to the hospitals and other settings where you receive care. So it's great to see so many of you. We, if you want to go to the next slide, today's conversation really is around the resurgence of COVID with the Delta variant and the impact that it's having on all of us, and how we can still maintain our focus on partnerships. Number of you have chatted in your name and organization and where across the country or in the world you're coming from. I just want to remind people that our conversations really are rich when you are actively participating, either through chat or through our open conversation with microphones on. And that's how we best learn from each other about our shared experiences and our different experiences. We will record this conversation and we will post it for those who registered but were unable to attend based on other commitments of their time. So we look forward to this conversation. If you want to go to the next slide. This is a slide from a colleague, and if you want to go ahead and fill out the poll about what environment you are working in or in partnership with. Although I have to tell you, when we got this picture from New Hampshire, I wanted my environment to be sitting on that deck next to those beautiful red flowers, or in the canoe once it's launched in the lake. Okay, so 80% of you are working in or partnering with hospitals and medical centers. And the rest are in primary care, ambulatory, home health, community organizations. And not surprising, Janice Tufte is involved in many of the options, so it was hard for her to choose which one made the most sense. So we're glad that all of you have joined, and I think that probably as it relates to the resurgence of COVID, hospitals are being hardest hit. So I can appreciate that many of you are really longing for this conversation. What I'm hoping is that as we have the conversation, that you'll be able to share any stories of partnership, what you've done to communicate trustworthy and factual information, if you've found effective ways to connect with folks, because that is that's really what I think all of us are longing for, is a sense of connection and a return to normalcy. And that is certainly disrupted, but I think those connections are really important. Next slide, please, Natasha. So in preparing for today's conversation, and even though, you know, I don't do a presentation perspective per se, I do like to go out and see what's going on in the world. And there were 3 articles that I found about responding to the different stages of a pandemic and the toll that it's taking on healthcare workers and others, and what we were learning in the early second surge of COVID. And so those articles will be shared when you get your email. And there is an article that Marie's going to create a link to related to that. The other thing that I did is I went out to CCI and listened to one of their health podcasts. And they were talking about the 4 stages of the pandemic response, which is readiness, response, recovery, and renewal. And I think all of us really want to be in the recovery renewal phase. But the podcast was very interesting in that the clinicians that were on the podcast were talking about what organizations and individuals can do with the kind of collective trauma. And they made a couple points. One is that trauma destroys relationships, and that the core of recovery is relationships. And so being mindful of and reconnecting relationships is really important. And you can certainly go out to listen to the podcast in its entirety. But some takeaways that I had were that the 3 C's really help reestablish relationships, and connection, coherence, and collaboration. And I'm always looking for ways to remember things. So the 3 C's kind of spoke to me. But they talked about things that organizations and individuals are doing. Mindfulness check-ins when organizations are starting meetings, and then at the end of meetings to really create an opportunity for gratitude practice. And then they looked at how to create reflective spaces within the workspace. And as I'm talking about these things, I'm wanting you to think about what you've seen in your organization or in other organizations. And then they talked a lot about having conversations with each other about how it's going, or taking the time to listen to stories from individuals, and not necessarily stories of the trauma, but stories of what's going on for them right now, some of which might be the trauma, but some of which might be things like, for instance, our granddaughters went back to school double mask with open classroom doors. And of course, that's a little anxiety provoking because they're too young to get the vaccine, but it's also something that's happening in my life. And so, being able to share stories like that. And then we obviously at the IPFCC really value collaboration. It's one of the hallmarks of patient and family-centered care. And they were talking about how important it is to be very mindful about collaboration, and how are we inviting people's opinions. And I think about patient and family advisors. I think about staff on the front line. I think about community groups. I think about communities, people of color who have maybe historically been marginalized, and how are we inviting their opinions and really taking the time to listen. And that always a question to ask is how, as we're working to cope with this and respond to what's going on, how do we allow for people's voices and their choices to be honored and heard? And how do we create time for rest and renewal, and we build it into the structure of our organization? So for instance, one of the speakers that was on the podcast was talking about how what had happened, with Zoom, it was like back-to-back meetings with like a minute break, not even that. And they would go one right after the other. And that organization made the decision that no meetings would last longer than 50 minutes, so that there were 10 minutes between each scheduled meeting, so that people could get up, they could stretch, they could breathe, they could have a moment before they had to go into another meeting. So anyway, so I found those kind of ideas really helpful, and I thought that it potentially might lead us to think about other ideas. If you want to go to the next slide, Natasha. And this is the link to that podcast on readiness, response, recovery, and renewal. And Marie's really right on top of it, sharing the links in our chat. And Janice, thank you for sharing your visual on how to embrace happiness. Next slide. So I wanted to take a minute before we launch into what we're specifically doing, and how you're holding up today in this moment. One or two word chat, just to check in with your colleagues on the call, and we'll have an opportunity to share in a minute. But let's just recognize that as we together join a meeting, that we come from different places and maybe in different spaces. Thanks, Teresa and Jennifer, for sharing, and others. And I think what's great is to know that we might not all be in the same space. And sometimes we have mixed feelings, as Jennifer is talking about, hopeful yet tired. So thanks for taking time. I was reflecting on at the beginning of the pandemic, we often would talk about how we're all in this together, in this storm. And recently I heard somebody share that we are all in the same storm, but we might not necessarily be in the same boat. Some of our boats are bigger and aren't feeling the waves as much, and some of us are in little dinghies, and we need to be mindful and grateful, but also aware of the fact that the storm is impacting each of us a little differently. So thank you, everyone, for sharing. And I appreciate that it is a difficult time, and a time where we thought we were kind of through this, and now we have to kind of hunker down and kind of get back into it, and that can be tough. So let's go ahead, and people are, if they're still chatting in, feel free to take a look at people's chats and share your own. But why don't we go to the next part of the conversation? And I just wanted to share what people were interested in chatting about. And what I want to do is I want to open up the conversation to hearing both how you're doing, but also what you're learning from this part of the pandemic, what's on your mind, what are things that create hopefulness, what are areas that you're challenged by. And here are some of the questions and thoughts that people had in terms of things that they'd like to be talking about, how we navigate and continue patient and family collaboration. How do we establish positive experiences for people, and how are we partnering as family presence and visitation comes and goes in different ways. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the lines to have people share what they're thinking, and see what's on people's minds and what they're experiencing right now. Who'd like to start?
This is Janice. I raised my hand. I just want to say thank you for holding this. I think it's important. And I think, I have challenges because I have friends on every side of the spectrum, right, from around the globe. And, very, very close friends, family friends for life, right? We have very different understandings of what is actually evidence and best practice. And so I've just found it's easiest to embrace them for who they are. And fortunately, they've been respectful of, whoever wants to wear a mask will wear a mask and that kind of thing. But it's hard because, I'm fully aware they're very educated and they just, have their own beliefs. And so, how can I feel it's important just to share, what I know. They're aware of what I work in, and, CDC, and, I'm working globally with COVID and evidence as a patient advisor. So I don't push it on them. And I think it's important to hear their side of the story. And I think this is really challenging around the United States right now because we are so divided. And, how do we communicate with others best practices, especially when understanding that the hospitals are overworked, the healthcare workers are overworked, and, and bringing that into the factor, but they still have their own strong beliefs.
Yeah, how do we maintain and build connection even when we have diverse viewpoints and different experiences and ideas around the pandemic? I mean, I think that really is the challenge, isn't it? Teresa, I see that you have your hand up as well. Did you want to share some thoughts?
Yeah, I would like to respond to Janice's question, and then I'll kind of share what I've been doing with involving patient and family advisors in our work. But, I think all hospitals right now are going through a house divided, so to speak, because many healthcare organizations have moved to mandating vaccinations and that is a challenge. We're doing what is best for our patients and our families, but at the same time, we're hearing all of this negative feedback from the community and from our own staff about, already being shorthanded and being overworked. And now we're putting mandates in that's going to make people leave. And you have to, that's internally, that's very hard to deal with. While I am pro-vaccine, I have to respect others' choices. But at the end of the day, I have to sit back and say, it's not about your choice. It's about what's doing right for the families that we are caring for and the patients each and every day. And when we decided to go into healthcare, regardless of what our roles are, we made that decision that we would do everything that we should to protect those that we care for. And that has caused a lot of angst and internal stress within the walls of the organization. And so for that reason, beyond the obvious of being overworked, understaffed, and the peaks of RSV and COVID right now in our own organization, at the beginning of COVID, we had a staff morale committee that we had put together, where we would gather all kinds of different ways to uplift and encourage staff, from chalk art outside of the entrances to all the donations we were receiving to, snacks with fun little messages and senior leadership taking them around. We had sunsetted that as things started to get back to normal, the new normal, right? And we have realized that in the last 3 weeks, we have been pulling that team back together because staff are just at their wits' end, and they don't see any sort of ray of sunshine in the horizon. My patient and family advisory council, though, they have been extremely engaged, even though they would love to be back in person. I've actually been able to grow my advisory council. And I think the reason for that is because we do have a better virtual platform to utilize. And that's giving younger families the opportunity to join where they don't have to worry about childcare. We have a family that's visiting us from out of the country, and I've been able to utilize 2 of my bilingual advisors to connect with them as another parent to talk to. And those types of things will just continue to elevate the parent partner program that we have. So I will digress and let others talk.
Well, Teresa, thank you so much for sharing. There are a number of comments in the chat as well. It's good to hear that there are some things gained in terms of partnership and the diversity and more advisors really working in partnership with you. Well, is your platform like Zoom, or what? How did you change your platform?
So we were using WebEx, and WebEx is not a very good virtual platform. So at the beginning of COVID, our hospital was moving to Microsoft Teams. So at that point, I started setting all of my families and patient advisors up on Teams. And, it's a wonderful way to keep them connected. And the other bonus to that is you can record your meetings and you can keep them on your Teams channel for those who weren't able to attend live and review that and still be able to give feedback.
Cool, great. Thank you for sharing that. I see we've got a couple other hands up. So Adrian, if you want, you've had your hand up, I think the longest, so it's probably tired. So if you want to go next, and then Nicole, you can be after that. So, and then I want to get to Lisa, who made a comment about some reconnecting that she's doing with advisors. But
Okay.
so that's kind of the orders so far that I see. And so go ahead.
Okay. Teresa, I can relate to the things you're saying. I am the co-chair of our patient family. Well, we have 4 PFACs at our hospital. We have our hospital acute care PFAC, which is kind of the overarching one, which I am co-chair of. We also have our women's and children's, which I am a member of. We also have a Latino PFAC that was officially fully formed last year. And we have a behavioral health PFAC as well. So I think some of our biggest challenges this year, we've been meeting on Zoom as PFACs since COVID. I think we had like a month and a half gap where they were trying to figure out what they were going to do. And so we've been very lucky here in Annapolis, Maryland. I don't think we have as much of the turmoil regarding vaccine hesitancy in our hospital as, say, other areas may. Of course, our hospital is mandating the vaccine as well, with the stipulation that there are certain groups that I think can still be exempt and they would have to have testing. So our hospital is working through all that as well. So I think for us, we are discovering, the more council meetings we sit on lately, is that we are having severe staffing shortages for nurses at the hospital. Our hospital is using a bunch of agencies, paying out the money to the agencies in order to get the staff. And like you were saying, Teresa, our staffs are, burnt out, but we do have a very strong connectivity at Luminous Health, which is the umbrella. And so I also sit on the leadership council, where I can actually see and hear what all of the leaders are talking about throughout the hospital system. We also have a wellness committee, basically, and the person that runs that, she holds actual services for the employees. They do like well-being timeouts and things like that. Our PFAs, we've always just been trying to figure out what we can do to help all the time. And so one of the things that we're going to try to start doing is create, like, I'm calling it right now the PFA Care Network. That's what I'm going to call it for now. Where one of you guys was saying that you get leadership and department units to give gifts and things and all that for staff, but we as PFAs would like to do that so that we can, meet up at the garage entrances or, some of the unit entrances, wherever we're allowed to be once we're able to go back, and, just give little snack items, little gifty items, just so that we recognize the staff. Because I think the hardest part for PFAs right now, at least for us, is trying to going back to find that balance between the necessity for patient family-centered care, but when you have staff that's burned out, or in this instance, you don't have nurses that are regular nurses, how do you continue that quality that you've already set forth as a patient family-centered care community? And as PFAs, we've spent 10 years building this program, and we don't want to see it falter. But right now, we have so many issues with just trying to keep our staff from, feeling like they're so overwhelmed that they can't add another thing to it, which the other issue is, how do you continually keep PFAs in the know all the time, part of the conversation regularly? We just went through a shift. We lost our coordinator during COVID. We now have someone, Mary, I don't know if you know her, Lil Boncaro. She's been active for a long, long time, since our patient family-centered care was created. She's going to take over. And with her, she's a nurse, a senior director. That's the only way that we have to continue our goals, is to have Lil be that person who's constantly saying to all the unit leaders, hey guys, you need to have some PFAs in there, and you need to have PFAs in there. We do have major support from admin, which is huge. So we have our president, our CEO, everybody. That's key. If you don't have that support, then it's really hard to keep a strong PFA program. I will say, this book was recommended for us PFAs. Patients Come Second, which is an interesting book because obviously as a PFA, patients come first in our mind. But right now, this book, Patients Come Second, is something that a lot of our admin staff is reading, so that you kind of have to, they're kind of compartmentalizing and trying to manage the stress that's happening, so that there's a balance. So I am trying to read this book to see where everybody's at, because that's where a lot of people are struggling on the clinical side. You're muted.
Well, you missed the best information. No, I'm kidding. I appreciate you sharing that book. What I thought of immediately when you mentioned that is that I remember being a new mother. This, of course, was years ago because I'm so old now. But I remember them saying you have to take care of yourself before you take care of your baby.
Yeah.
And in some ways, it's like that. Healthcare workers have to take care of themselves so that they have capacity to care for others. So, so you covered a lot of territory about all the different things, but what I heard loud and clear was that there still remains a strong commitment to partnership, both on the PFA side and on the leadership, administrative, clinical side, and that you're allowing some grace for understanding that there's shifting going on without panicking that you're going to lose what you've created in 10 years. And isn't that part of relationship, that kind of give and take? And
Yeah. I mean, we really have to just kind of stay steadfast. But I mean, our hospital is experiencing what a lot of other hospitals are experiencing. We have violence in the workplace from patients, from families, with our staff. And I mean, there's so many things going on that, as PFAs, really all we can do right now is, kind of, we're here. We would like to help with all the initiatives going on, but what can we do to keep you guys going too is important. So we want that strength of relationship with clinicians and staff first, in order to be able to even continue what we've been doing for the past 10 years.
yeah. Nicole, you've been waiting patiently. Would you like to share what's going on in your sphere of influence?
Sure. So many different trails of thought from what everyone's saying. I want to say thank you to Teresa for talking about the PFAC because I have to start a PFAC from the ground up basically at my hospital, as I have just entered the organization within the last couple of months. And during COVID, unfortunately, folks here were not as willing to, go online and to do meetings via WebEx, which I know is less of a, user-friendly platform. But we were looking at using Zoom, so maybe I'll look at Teams as well, if you think that that's preferable for people who don't typically use online meetings. So thank you for that. And if anyone else has any tips on how to grow PFAC from nothing in a pandemic, I would appreciate that. Something I want to touch on is, it has come up a couple times, talking about, not pushing our opinions about the vaccine on people, and, especially like family and just friends, acquaintances, parents in the bus line, whatever. I think it's important as professionals in healthcare to not frame it so much of well, everyone is entitled to their opinion type of a thing. Like, we wouldn't have people who don't know better coming in to give us their ideas on best practices for cardiac surgery. We have to sort of draw a line between respecting opinions and unfounded fact and acknowledging what we know to be true. And yes, what we know to be true does change from time to time, but we have to always go with what we know most at the moment. So kind of having those conversations without being disrespectful at all or talking down people, but learning from each other. You have to learn from people who know more than you do about a subject, right? So you can't be passing knowledge around as if it's factual if it's not. And really respecting people's fear around it or hesitancy, I think, has proven to be the most effective for me. I know that I have a few people in my life that didn't want to be vaccinated, and I said, I can understand why you feel that way. Honestly, I didn't want to vaccinate my daughter before I had her because I went down a rabbit hole of reading things and, all of the possible issues that can come up. And, it's not a frequent thing, but the more you look at it, if you're looking for it, you'll find it. So, but we have to do what's best generally. So I want what's best for you generally. So I hope that you decide to do this and feel comfortable with it. And, people understand if they don't feel like you're attacking them, I think that they accept it more openly. I don't know if anyone wants to say anything about that, but I don't mean to say that you have to push your opinion on someone, but it's not really an opinion, it's science. So we kind of have to, not push them to it, but bring them to it.
It's like inviting them to.
Yeah, absolutely.
What I really like, however, is that the first connection that you made, or as you described it, is to really acknowledge where people are at and their feelings, and those feelings are real.
For sure.
Those feelings may not be based on the latest science, but it is their reality. And so sometimes if we take time to acknowledge where people are at and what their feelings are and that they're valid for them, then they don't have to fight so hard with us to feel like they're acknowledged, because feelings are feelings, and telling someone that they're not feeling what they're feeling just entrench it. I mean, when that happens to me, in a relationship, or it's like we entrench ourselves, but that is how I'm feeling. And so we get into that kind of fight mode. So what I really appreciated is that focus that you had on, and as you described it, kind of a calmness, but also acknowledgement of feelings real and accept for that. So
right.
Thank you.
And the more you try to tell someone to think how you think, they're going to go further in the opposite direction. So I just feel that it's really important to not be too forgiving of misinformation. And I always kind of feel like I've let myself and the world down when I walk away from a conversation, having not acknowledged, like, no, I understand that you feel that way, but maybe you shouldn't. Like sometimes you just don't feel like getting into those conversations. or you don't know someone too well or whatever. I found this a lot recently at events for school and sports for my kids, parents saying, oh no, I'm not vaccinated, and sometimes I get into it and sometimes I don't, but I feel like it's really important for us to get into it.
In a respectful way, I'm sure.
Right, of course. Yeah, absolutely. And sharing my, my story, because truly, I mean, I lost sleep over it for a long time. I was really anxiety ridden about what to do. Am I setting my child up for, an injury, or am I setting them up for some sort of a disease and hardships getting, going to school and being around other kids? Like I was really, really torn. So I understand the feelings, but it's just that, like you said, they're feelings, and we have to work through it because we do work in healthcare and there are ways that we understand that things work. So just sharing that with folks.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing, Nicole. I think I said that Lisa could talk next, related to how you're reconnecting with patient and family advisors. Lisa?
Did you mean me, Mary?
Yes. Yes.
I appreciate that. Well, we've assessed a couple of things, and I'm sure you all feel these things as well. And I want to say this is such an impressive group, and my heart just goes out to everybody who's on the front line dealing directly with patients and patient advisors and trying to keep them encouraged and connected. We assessed that many PFACs simply closed up shop, and many organizations basically stopped communicating with their patient advisors. We found that time after time in Utah, as we reached out for a research project to the hospitals. Well, we can't do it because we can't meet with our advisors because of COVID. And we thought, that's interesting. And so we reached out to some experts, including our friends at Comagine Health here in Utah, and Joe Miller and Cheryl Chadwick at Children's Mercy in Kansas City have done an excellent job of meeting remotely with patient advisors. In the case of Children's Mercy, they have a number of advisory councils, including their Hispanic Advisory Council, that have continued to meet regularly. And what we wanted to do was gather the information about how meeting remotely could work. And I know that IPFCC has covered this topic also. But we did a webinar just yesterday on that. It was very well attended. We also offered a how-to PDF that is supposed to have been posted, I haven't checked yet, on our website under our resources tab. And it just is a list of things to take into consideration to facilitate having virtual meetings with patient advisors. And we're going to continue in a series for several months on how to get going on having patient advisors. And Mary, if I can just take another second, I want to mention that I interviewed a patient here recently on a trip to Montana in a relatively small town who is severely traumatized by the COVID experience. She has not had COVID, but she had a baby in March of 2020. And the child actually ended up having a birth-related defect that impacted their respiratory status. And so when they presented at the ER when the baby was a week old, appropriately, because the child wasn't breathing right, they were treated as if they had COVID. And she describes it as being like a pariah, like they were nobody wanted anything to do with them. And what she had was a newborn, first-time mother who had a birth defect that caused him to stop breathing in his sleep and have low oxygen levels from suppressed respirations. So this is fairly common. People should be able to recognize it, but they were treated like they had COVID and placed on a floor of people who were COVID positive. And people wouldn't come help her because they might get COVID and all these different things. Anyway, she's severely traumatized still over a year later by that experience. And she posted it online. She posted what we discussed online. And I was interested at the number of women who replied that they also had been traumatized by visitation rules, giving birth at the time when they weren't allowed to have support persons, being separated from their babies because the baby might be sick, and the worry about the child, and all of these different things. And I don't know that what I was hearing from these women is that these issues have not yet been addressed, and they've been traumatized and need support, and that we really need to look at making sure these things don't occur going forward. And we offer more support and embrace people at these difficult times. And it's hard. It's really hard, isn't it?
It is hard, and I think it's also an example of how the experience of COVID has impacted people in different ways, and that there's trauma around it, but all the trauma isn't the same. So we really have to check in with people, and we have to begin to think about what kinds of support systems we can set up that have flexibility to honor what people's needs are right now. And so I think that's really important. And I think, there's the trauma for individuals receiving care, and then there's the trauma for those providing the care. And I think some of those articles shed some light into some things that can be really helpful. I want to be sure that we have an opportunity to look at the next slide, Natasha, because it really was another area that people were wanting to spend some time on related to workplace and leadership. We talked a little bit about the individual experiences people have had, what's working, how we've engaged patient and family advisors, and how advisors have stepped up to the plate to support frontline staff. But there was a question about what encourages leaders to sustain effective PFCC practices. And I'm wondering if there are some individuals on the line who are in leadership positions that can speak to what has helped sustain them in effective PFCC practices.
This is Teresa.
Please.
Sorry, Jennifer, do you want to go? Okay. There are a couple of things that we have done in the last several months. One of the things was that we established a peer support program where staff members from all areas of the hospital have the opportunity to be trained for their peers to be able to come to them and talk openly and honestly, and just have that that confidence to have someone who has been trained to listen. And once a peer supporter actually talks with another staff member, there's a report that is filled out and submitted to the leaders of that peer support program so they can follow any trends, especially in different units or departments of the hospital. So we all have we have a pen that goes on our badge so we're easily recognized. as a peer supporter. And it's a cute little small pen. It's purple, it's a calming color, and it has two hands, coming together. The second thing is that our marketing team put together an amazing, it's called an Above and Beyond reward program. And staff members, any staff member, any leader from any area of the hospital can go in and they can recognize a staff member for living one of our values. And once they are recognized, they are awarded points. So every staff member gets a certain number of points per every 6 months, and they can award them to anybody. And so the wonderful thing is that the staff member who is being recognized, they will earn points. They can purchase special items off of a little site. They're branded items, but they're fun items, things you can't get anywhere else. And then they also receive a certificate as to why they are being recognized. So whether it's for collaboration, so they get this big certificate that they can print out and they can hang up, or, whatever they choose to do with it. And then there's a message board, kind of like Facebook. It's almost like Facebook. When somebody is recognized, that is automatically put into this little scrolling screen, so everybody can see that logs into the Above and Beyond program that so many staff members, or this staff member has been recognized. That has really helped. But we still have, with increasing employee and engagement, but we still have, with the resurgence of COVID, there's definitely some more things. And we've even sent out a survey to find out what we can do as leadership to help with morale. And so we've gotten lots of responses.
Good. Well, it's a great and concrete example of how you're inviting people's voices to be heard and really listening. Jennifer, you were going to share something. I saw your
Hi. So my experience echoes many people's with how tired staff are and all that's been going on, during this last 18 months. I wanted to just touch on more about the leadership commitment and what's kind of gone well for us. So I'm in Canada and I'm in Ontario, and I live in Toronto, which is a major city in Ontario. And the hospital I work for has it's two different hospitals. One hospital has the emergency room, the ICU, level 3 NICU, and a large mental health program. And then I work also at a rehab hospital that has from palliative care to rehab, ortho rehab, everything. So two big centers. And during this time, some of the smaller PFACs did go on hold. However, our two corporate PFACs at each location remained up and running. And I think a big part of it was our chief really believes in patient and family engagement, and that leadership support, being at the IMS table during COVID where all decisions were being made, enabled her to come to the PFAC as well and ask for, the patient and family voice about the changes in the visitor policy, for example, or at one time we had a directive where patients could be sent anywhere to receive care. So they could have been sent 2 hours away and not the hospital of their choice, depending because of our ICU numbers and just the needs in the community. And some hospitals weren't doing well. So we had to kind of pull together and support the system. So I think having that level of engagement and then for everybody else at that really important decision-making table to know that feedback from patients and families is making it to the table was really crucial. Kind of what maybe we've lost, one of my own concerns that I carry is that we had launched family presence across both sites in 2018 and it was going well, and we had caregiver ID and access cards. So obviously when in March, when we were closed to all visitors, all of that shift, all those gains we had made in culture came to an abrupt stop. And then we started to look at appeals and visiting an essential care partner again. But we had come so far with really positive culture changes. So I think my next, when it's appropriate, we kind of keep an eye on what's currently taking place and us being in the fourth wave. But when it's time to move back there, I'm just hopeful that staff will again embrace, our family caregivers as partners again, and that we'll be able to gain traction again moving forward.
Great. I think it is really important to recognize that although the culture that was built has been shaken a bit, when we think about the trauma that we've experienced, if the way back is, as was shared in the podcast and in a lot of work related to trauma-informed care, if the way back is through relationship and connection, if we're mindful of that so that we think about those relationships that were rocked a bit or disrupted and how we get back to that, I think it can make a really, really big difference. There has been a lot of activity in the chat, both in terms of response to the sharing that's happened, but also in terms of, I know that Adrian, there's a lot of interest in the survey that you mentioned that you have sent out to your PFA community during the time. And if it would be easiest for you to send a copy of that survey to us, we could certainly post it on the website rather than you individually sending it to individual folks, but it's whatever you might find would work best for you. Adrian, do you want to share a little bit about that?
The ironic thing is that we did this survey through SurveyMonkey, and we have been having trouble accessing the most recent responses that we had as of August, but I still have all of the actual questions, and I have the most recent. We had like 52 respondents, and then we had an additional 10 come that we have not been able to access. That's kind of like we think it's a SurveyMonkey issue, but either way, the reason why we did this survey is that we felt that the timing just seemed to be perfect. Our PFAs, we have like, right now we have about 83 plus active PFAs. And at the time of the survey, our coordinator left us. She had to do something very important in her life. But there was this huge disconnect, and we felt that asking the PFAs, basically trying to get a new baseline for where they're at, what they're feeling, their time commitment, everything from the time commitment they would like to put in now to the areas of interest, the departments they would like to work with, things like that. It really just kind of gave us a new baseline. And so now I, as co-chair, along with my coordinator and my other co-chair, we're kind of going back and using this information and tailoring it to the next steps that we're going to use for progressing our PFA program. And actually, one of the things that we have done, which I was already thinking about doing that before the survey, but the survey really made it an imperative. We've created a separate group. We have so many different groups, but PFAs just really want to be involved, is what we've discovered, especially if you're reaching out to them. We have created a PFA debrief group, which is basically monthly for all of our current PFAs who are actively involved in committees and or councils. So it's not our whole PFA community, but it's the PFAs who are engaging with leadership and departments on a regular basis. We didn't want that information that they're receiving to just go to a black hole. We want them to feel like they can share the information. And what we have discovered is that some of the information is something that we should have on our agenda items for our council meetings, or it should be for discussion as a PFA community. So that survey just kind of, gave us a starting off point of how we can kind of restart, rebuild the community during COVID, because obviously we all experienced like a lag, an issue, and we still have PFAs in our community that have not been involved. And we're trying to work through all of that because we have a fairly large community. So the survey did help, and we did get quite a few respondents. I mean, we got way more than half the respondents. It's just that accessing some of it right now has been a challenge.
Great response rate, and I appreciate you sharing that. And if you want to share that survey questions, that would be wonderful. I noticed that there are a number of chats, and I hope people have been able to take a look at them. Marie, in particular, since there was an issue around family presence, did share with you the document that we created around developing family presence policies and doing it in an inclusive way. The time is such that we really need to move on, and it's really hard because that hour goes so fast, and this has been a very rich discussion. I think that the part that I take away is the level of commitment that still is maintained here, and that people really care, and that they're looking for ways to create structures, either temporary structures or ongoing structures that are going to help us reconnect with each other. I want to, if we can go to the next couple slides really quickly. For those of you that aren't familiar, we do have a bunch of resources in addition to the one Marie just talked about at our COVID site on our regular IPFCC best practices area. Next slide. We will continue to put and post things in PFCC Connect. We encourage you to do that as well. Next slide. And if you need assistance in how to access the library and where the folders are, Natasha is great, but there's also some links here just to help you get there, because there's all kinds of ongoing conversations that we've had over the last 18 months that have good ideas around resilience and re-energizing and those kinds of things. Next slide. So we started with, how people were feeling as they started the meeting. I'd like to just take a moment for people to go ahead and just chat in what they're grateful for. And it doesn't have to be about this conversation, just what is it that helps you get up every day and continue to maintain your commitment? What inspires you? And so I think that's a good way to end in terms of what we're grateful for. I am certainly for today grateful that all of you made time in what is a stressful and busy schedule to stop for a moment and reflect on the great work that you're doing, and also the great compassion and commitment that you have for patient and family-centered care, and to each other, and to the ongoing learning that we're having during this pandemic. If we can go to the last slide, Marie's going to go ahead and put in the Survey Monkey, which hopefully we can access. After your experience, Adrian, I'm going to hope that we can access your comments about how today's conversation went and what additional topics you'd like us to promote and elevate into a conversation for next month. We appreciate your commitment, and we appreciate the work that you're doing on the ground. If you're on the front lines, please take care of yourself. And if you're in a supportive role, know that the relationships you have with people on the front lines and in helping bring patient and family voice to them in a way that supports them is really important. So thank you so much for your time today. Feel free to reach out to me with ideas for future conversations or any feedback that you might give. I know that there was a quick chat where somebody was wanting to know how to join a particular group. Please just email me that request and I will connect with you outside of this conversation so that you can get what you need in terms of being part of our larger community. Have a great day, everyone, and be safe out there.